Hi everybody, I want to do a quick review of the Unit 5 outline like we do at the start of every different unit. This one is fully focused on viruses. So PowerPoint 1 is going to cover the different parts of a virus or components, their life cycle and how they replicate, and how we actually study them, because remember, viruses cannot grow on Petri plates. They have to be in a live host. So first we're going to discuss size. Viruses are in nanometers, not micrometers. They're much smaller than bacteria that we've worked with in lab. Next we have the different components. So we're going to cover the capsid and envelope. Oops, sorry about that. Then what a virion is, specific particles, and spikes, which are also known as glycoproteins. And finally, some enzymes. These enzymes are proteolytic, and I will explain this in Unit 5 PowerPoint 1. Then we're going to talk about the different steps in the life cycle of a virus. First, they have to attach to receptors on the host. Then they enter, or that's entry, also known as penetration, how they synthesize or grow. Maturation are the different steps for them to start replicating, and eventually they release. We will talk about shedding and transmission, especially in Unit 5 PowerPoint 2, where we discuss the different types of viruses that we're going to use as our example. Next, we're going to talk about how we actually detect viruses. Remember, these cannot be grown on Petri plates the way we could have potentially grown bacteria in the lab, and therefore we'll talk about how we cultivate them. This is known as tissue culture, so I'll give you some examples. We're also going to use the flu vaccine and how they're grown as another example. Next, we're going to talk about prions and viroids. These fall into the virus module, but they are in fact not viruses. Prions are nothing more than a rogue protein, and viroids are a tiny circular little piece of RNA. So these are very unique and very special, so we'll talk about them when we hit the PowerPoint. We're going to discuss virus and host interactions. You're already familiar with these terms because they are acute, which is the quick onslaught symptoms, chronic and persistent, so this is something that is lasting for a longer time, and latent. Another term for that is dormant, meaning the virus is sleeping. For that, the example I'm going to use is herpes virus. When someone has herpes, they won't always have an outbreak where it is visible on the genitals. And finally, the different viral pathogens to know. If you remember in the last unit when we covered pathogens, you had to know which organ system they actually were attached to, or which organ system they impacted. Well, in this case, you're being told in advance. So for respiratory, we're covering influenza, which is the typical flu virus, and RSV, which is respiratory syncytial virus. Then we have the mucocutaneous ones. These are mostly, think skin. More times than not, they are STIs, so HSV for herpes and HPV for human papillomavirus. For enteric, which is think GI tract, we're going to do rotaviruses. For hepatic, think of the liver, so it'll be hepatitis A, B, and C. We're not going to talk about Ebola, which is sad because that's my favorite. Next ones that impact the nervous system, this will be rabies and West Nile. Then circulatory system, we're going to talk about Epstein-Barr, which is somehow related to herpes. You'll understand that a little bit better when we start discussing the viruses. And finally, an opportunistic virus, which is CMV, also known as cytomegalovirus. So for all of these viruses, just as you had to know for the pathogens in the previous unit, you have to know the disease that they cause, the tissue they infect. Since you've already been given the organ system, you know that in advance. How it's transmitted, airborne, foodborne, waterborne, how does it get from point A to point B? Some of the organisms will also potentially have a vector, which is, think of the rat flea when we covered Yersinia pestis, and then anything interesting that's pointed out. This will come common when we discuss the different STIs. Next, we're going to have a mini discussion about cancer. I am actually not going to have you guys do that PowerPoint. I only put 4 questions on the exam worth 2 points each. So I'm going to ask that you come up with a definition for all of these terms right here. Carcinogens, not transformation, and not primary and secondary. So just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, these 6 terms. Understand the difference between benign and malignant. Benign is a tumor that is non-cancerous. Malignant is a tumor that is actually cancerous. And when a malignant tumor moves or shifts in the body and impacts another part of the body, it's called you would say that it has metastasized. No, not metastasized. Let's try that spelling again. It's known as metastasis, and you say that it has metastasized. So, a little bit of information for you about cancers right here. And finally, on the last page, number 1 through 8, these are your objectives. And you are very much able to do the 5-point extra credit for this, just like you've done for the other units. I'll post an area for that on Canvas. So for the pathogens, which is Unit 5, Part 2, again, I'm going to ask everybody to make note cards because that is by far the simplest way to do it. If you have the original outline, you'll notice 4 or 5 pages were related to HIV, which I've intentionally pulled out of this outline because we might do something with that topic for the last week of class, but I'm still debating that.